Well, welcome everyone. Like Samantha just said, this talk is about tips for working with a statistician. And so to briefly introduce myself, my name is Camille Hochheimer. I am a collaborative biostatistician. I live here on campus in CETA, the Center for Innovative Design and Analysis, which is basically the collaborative hub for biostatisticians on our campus. So we're a group that's we're connected to the Department of Biostatistics and Informatics, but we're really like where all of the collaborative biostatisticians live on campus. And what else about me? I also manage our consulting center. So if you've ever tried to interact with our consulting center, you probably have talked to me at some point. And we'll talk a little bit more at the very end about some of the resources that we offer through the consulting center. But yeah, to give you a brief overview of the agenda for this talk today, we're going to, number one, discuss different models of statistical support. Number two, discuss how to find and nurture a relationship with a statistician. And then number three, give advice for working with EHR data. And so this is really kind of aimed at investigators that are not necessarily statisticians, but if you are a statistician, I hope you'll be interested anyway, maybe learn a couple things along the way. But really the goal is that at the end of this, we'll understand when and how to include a statistician in your research team. And please interrupt me at any point you have questions. You can even put them in the chat. I got like 3 screens going, so I'm trying to make sure I can see what's happening in the chat. Samantha's gonna help me with that too. But yeah, but feel free to also just raise your hand and I'm happy to answer questions. But I want to start with a poll. So there's my poll. So I want to know who's in the audience. So are you a clinical faculty or trainee? Are you a medical student? Are you a master's or PhD student, MPH student, or other? And I would love it if you would put your department or your concentration or any other affiliation in the chat so I can kind of get an idea of the different departments that are represented. Probably the clinical faculty and trainees are pretty well represented here. Some medical students, a couple of MS and PhD students. We have an MPH student, but the majority of you fall into other categories. So I obviously need to pick different categories next year. Awesome. So to kind of dive into the different types of statistical support, I have 3, this is kind of Venn diagram, but also these are there's similarities between these and then also differences. So I guess that's why it's a Venn diagram. But we have team science, statistical collaboration, and statistical consulting. And well, I'm going to really focus on statistical collaboration and statistical consulting in our talk today, but I also wanted to bring up team science because the goal of CETA really is to foster team science on our campus. And so I think how I would describe team science is when you have, a group of researchers where you have everyone kind of like integrated into one. So you have your clinical leads, if it's a clinical research team, you have a biostatistician there, you have your support staff that's helping you actually like facilitate and run clinical trials. But it really works as like an entire research unit or research team. And in our experience, this is probably the most satisfying relationship for everyone. And so that's kind of what we're aiming for. But a lot of times when you are first interacting with statisticians, you probably fall more into the statistical consulting and statistical collaboration buckets. But then also there's times when these are really just like more appropriate than a team science atmosphere. So hopefully that becomes more clear as we go along. So when we are thinking about consulting versus collaboration, consulting, I would consider something to be more short term. So maybe there's like a fixed amount of work, there's generally defined endpoints. Maybe you just want something like feedback on your study design. So this could fit into maybe you come to 1 or 2 1-hour consults and get feedback on your study design. Maybe you have a research project, but it's pretty small and well-defined. And that's small is not a bad thing, right? So if you do just a small amount of research, because it's part of your position, but it's not your main focus, that's maybe a good opportunity to have someone consult with you and either do consulting for the analysis portion, or maybe just to kind of help you along your way with the study design or appropriate methods. Generally, when we do consulting, it's on an hourly payment of some sort. And the drawback here is that your consultant is probably not invested in the entire length of your project. So potentially you come to someone and you get some feedback on study design, and then you kind of go off and you do your own project. Or maybe you've already completed your data collection and you've realized that the analysis is like potentially a little more complicated than you had expected, and so you come and have someone do the analysis. So they're really just kind of involved at that later stage. I say this is a drawback just because I think sometimes there are hiccups that happen when someone's not involved throughout the whole process. But I don't want to talk about consulting in a negative way, because there are many examples of times when consulting is totally appropriate and the best way to incorporate statistics into your project, whether that's you really just need a little bit of advice along the way, or maybe that's just all you can afford through your resources. It's just a little bit of statistical consulting time. And then I want to contrast that with collaboration, which is when a statistician is generally involved in the entire project from start to finish. So maybe this person helped actually write the grant, and then they stay involved all the way through to the dissemination phase of that grant. Or maybe you have a research project and they help you kind of formulate a nice formal research question, and then they essentially are involved all the way through to the analysis and help you do the analysis and final write-up. This is more of a mutually beneficial relationship. So I think something that people don't realize is statisticians like to be involved in the whole research project. And the other reason I think this proves to be beneficial is because if a statistician is involved in the study design and how the data are collected, they generally are able to do the analysis more quickly and efficiently because they understand what is being collected and how it's being collected, because they were involved in that process. And the other thing that I think that this helps in a positive way is that if you have a statistician involved at the design stage, hopefully they can help you design a research study that's actually going to answer your question, and then follow through all the way to the final analyses. So I think this is why this tends to be kind of a more satisfying relationship. But again, you have to have the resources and also kind of the need to have a statistician involved at every stage. So I have another poll, which is how, let me get my polls back out. So I am interested in what people's past interactions have been with statisticians. So have you consulted with someone? Have you collaborated with them? Awesome. So it seems like actually most people here have neither consulted nor collaborated with a statistician. So that is really good to know. So that's a good thing that you're here. We're happy you're here. And then we can see it's kind of the next most common thing with someone you've collaborated. 17% have both consulted and collaborated. And then about 10% of people have consulted with the statistician. Okay. So another thing to think about is that your relationship with a statistician is a relationship. So just a reminder that just like in a relationship outside of work, we should treat this like similarly, in that it's important to have good communication, hold on a second. Okay. So just like we want to have clear expectations with people, we have relationships with outside of work. We also want to make sure we have clear expectations with our statisticians. So when you start working with a statistician, I think it's really important that there's a discussion about what are the expectations for communication, for behavior, for funding, for authorship. These are all things that we want to make sure everyone is on the same page about at the outset of this relationship. So the alignment of expectations is probably the most important thing you can do to have a successful relationship with your statistician, just like you would with, again, anyone else that you have a relationship with. If you're not getting what you need from your statistician, I recommend that you talk to them about it. A lot of us have worked with a bunch of different research groups, and we kind of default to how our previous research group maybe interacted. So for example, maybe you had a group that didn't really didn't need you to give regular reports, and so you just don't give them, and then your group is like, what are you doing? So if you need someone to, for example, give regular reporting, it's important to tell them that that's something you expect. For example, if you want them to communicate about statistics in a different way, that's up. We want to be able to communicate what we're doing in a way that's most helpful for the whole team. We want everyone to understand what's going on from a statistics perspective. And so if there's a different way that we can communicate that, we want to know. So I highly recommend that if you feel like you're just not totally getting what you want from that relationship, just talk to them, because chances are they just have kind of defaulted to how they have worked in a previous situation, and every research team is unique. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. Again, just like with relationships outside of work, sometimes you have a fit, it's just not a good fit with you and your statistician. And I encourage you to not just generalize that to say, well, it's just statisticians, I don't work well with them, or they don't work well with my team. There's been several situations in our group where we have simply just switched out personnel because it just wasn't a good fit. And then everyone seems to be working a lot better. So it's not always a good fit, and you might need to keep looking. But it's definitely worth trying first to have discussions about expectation setting, and then also just having talk about what you need from your statistician. So I'm interested in how people would describe their ideal collaboration. So I'm not sure if anyone has ever done a Menti before, but you can go to menti.com, and then you click, or then you put in this code. So the code is 28702020. Excuse me. And then it will ask you to put 8 words in. You don't have to put in 8 words. You can just put in 1 if you want to. But we're gonna make a word cloud together. So I can say, put this in the chat. Oh, that was just a second. And then 280. Cool, so I see some results popping up. So hopefully you can see this kind of updating as you all. Awesome. So mutually beneficial seems to be a big one here. Communication, communicative, respectful, responsive, I think fits with the communication, cooperative, collaborative, breaks down the info, a lot of communication ones here, which is awesome. Cause I think that's totally fair to expect, your statistician to help with communication. Simplistic explanations, definitely enlightening, productive, appeal to lay people, involved, positive, honest, supportive, available. Awesome. So I would say the main themes I'm kind of seeing here are, the main theme really is like communication, communication and availability. Cool. All right, we're gonna go back to the slides. And so I'll share with you, one of my colleagues did this with our group actually, to see how biostatisticians describe their ideal collaboration. And there are definitely some overlaps in terms of the communication. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is there's a lot more language around like team and included. So basically you're in an ideal collaboration, we really love to feel like we're part of the team, like we are included in decisions about the project structure, the study design and things like that. And so, yeah, but that's also really helpful to know that what people really hope to get out of us is really clear communication. But yeah, but from our perspective, I think being part of the team, being collaborative is what is really important and what biostatisticians seek in a relationship. So I talked a little bit in the expectations section about authorship, and I think it's helpful to go through what are the expectations kind of from the statistician's point of view for authorship. So our policy follows the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, ICMJE. Basically, so any biostatistician that conducts analysis or makes a significant contribution is going to be a co-author on the publication to acknowledge their intellectual contribution. And so something I want to bring up here is that sometimes we are involved in some pretty gnarly data wrangling. And so that project theoretically could not have gone forward without our skill set in doing the data wrangling. And so I think in that case, in that case, that has actually earned authorship, even if that person didn't do analysis for you. So that's something important as we get into EHR data, kind of towards the end of this talk, that if someone is able to wrangle your EHR data into an analysis data set for you, that actually is deserving, that has fulfilled the requirements of authorship. So first author is not really super common for a biostatistician in a collaborative or team science setting. I will say that generally, if you're working on a large project or a large grant, maybe the biostatistician will lead one of those papers, for example, especially if it has more to do with like methodology that was used in the project. But in this case, the biostatistician would have had to play really a major role in the project development, or substantially change the directions of the hypotheses and the corresponding analyses. So an example of this would be perhaps your biostatistician helped you come up with a new hypothesis based on what was going on with your data, and then proceeded to actually lead that part of the project. That would be a situation where that biostatistician potentially should be the first author on that paper. But generally, we fall into the second author territory, which is when we've played a major role in the project development, offered the expertise needed for the project, and then conducted substantial analysis of the data. So like I said, this is the typical position of a biostatistician, especially if they have unique analytic expertise. biostatisticians who are the middle listed author maybe didn't really collaborate in the design of the study, but did do the data analysis, wrote the statistical methods section, and assisted in interpreting the results. And then finally, you have the senior author, which again is pretty uncommon, I think, but unless the biostatistician really provided significant mentoring to the first author, that would be an example of when they would be a senior author. The other thing I'd like to point out is that we often work in pairs. So generally there's a senior statistician and a more junior statistician who are working together on a project. And so in that case, the junior statistician is probably doing the bulk of the work, but the senior biostatistician is still giving a lot of input and mentorship on the direction of that analysis or data management. And so usually, for example, the junior biostatistician is in the second author position, the senior should go right behind them. So generally you put your biostatistician team together with the junior statistician first and the senior statistician directly after them. Are there questions about authorship? I also, like I said, it's all about managing expectations. So at the start of a project, I highly recommend having the discussion with your statistician saying, what are your expectations? Number one, in terms of authorship, period, but it's also worth having the conversation about where in the authorship order they are expecting to fall. It's sometimes an awkward conversation to have, but it really saves you from having something awkward happen at the end that's going to make everyone cranky. So another poll, just to make sure we're all still awake this afternoon. So this is my question for you, is if you attended a 1-hour consultation for advice, should that statistician be an author on your manuscript? All right. So the majority of you said no, and that is the correct answer. So while we want to make sure that a statistician gets the credit, something to be aware of when you name a statistician on a manuscript as an author, basically any numbers that are included in that manuscript are kind of attributed to that person, whether they did the analysis or not. And so that means any questions about the analysis or about numbers that are maybe in tables or figures are automatically going to be assumed to be the responsibility of the biostatistician or statistician on the paper. And so generally, if someone has simply just given you advice on how to do the paper, if you want to add an acknowledgement, that's fine. But naming them as an author means that they have some sort of responsibility surrounding the paper, and that's actually not appropriate in that case. The other thing I was thinking about this also in terms of if someone has contributed to a lot of heavy data management but not done the analysis, generally the manuscript the journal has a section where they allow you to write kind of what everyone's contributions were to the paper. And so I think that's a place where it would be important to distinguish who actually did the analysis and then also who did the heavy lifting on the data management, so that the numbers in terms of the analysis are attributed to the person who actually did that analysis. And I bring this up because this question comes up a lot. So if you answered yes, you are certainly not alone. There's a lot of, this comes up a lot. And so you shouldn't be, I don't know. We all learned, I guess. Okay, so like I kind of mentioned earlier, we really are trained to help at all stages of the research process. some people don't realize that biostatisticians and statisticians are really trained in everything from like the initial study design all the way through to the final analysis and all of the little pieces in between. We can help you figure out how to set up a data collection instrument that's going to really make sure you're answering your question. We can help you figure out how many people you need to recruit for your study. We can help you with the data management. So sometimes you need some pretty fancy data management in order to get a nice analysis data set. And so these are just some examples of when you need a statistician. And I also link at the bottom. And so the slides will be shared at the end, so you'll be able to go to this document. But the American Statistical Association put out a document called When You Consult a Statistician, What to Expect. And they have a whole section on when do you need a statistician. So here's some examples. I think I went through these already, but maybe one I didn't talk about is if you're working with methods or type of data that you've never worked with before, that's a good time to go talk to a statistician. Excuse me. If you have a volume of data that you can't handle yourself, the biggest example of this is EHR data, and I'll go into a little more detail about that. That's a good time to go consult a statistician. And we know that a lot of people have some sort of basic stats background. If you're involved in research, you probably had to take a statistics course at some point in your life. And in some cases, the simple analysis that you maybe learned is totally appropriate and a good way to move forward. But sometimes you need to use something that's a little bit more sophisticated or difficult, and that's a good time to go to a statistician. Number one, you could go to a 1-hour consult when you're trying to figure out if something needs to be more complicated than you've already set it up to be. And then you can, if the answer is yes, then include a statistician in your project in order to let them help you with the methodology there and actually perform a more complicated analysis. I'm trying to see, I had some notes here. Want to make sure I got everything. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that we want to be able to set you up for success to answer your research question. You would be shocked at the number of times that people come to us with a data set that they've already collected all of the data, and how they collected their data doesn't actually answer the research question that they had from the beginning. And so our biggest goal as statisticians is we want to make sure that you can successfully answer your research question. So coming to a statistician early and often is our best suggestion to make sure that you're successful in that way, because you would be shocked at the number of times that doesn't happen. And yeah, also thinking about the sample sizes, it's also really helpful to get a statistician's opinion to see if you are looking at a rare disease, for example, you might not actually be able to get enough subjects in just the University of Colorado system alone to actually answer your research question. This might be something where you need to collaborate with other centers, things like that. And so that's another good place to check in with a statistician and make sure that the sample size that you can feasibly collect is going to actually be enough to be powered to answer your research question. So I included this quote from that ASA document that says, when you consult a statistician, you enlist the help of a professional who's particularly skilled at solving research problems. The statistician will try to guide you to the best way to obtain an answer to your research questions. So, like I said, we really are interested in this holistic approach to research. We aren't just trying to get the numbers and run analyses. We're interested in more than just the numbers at the end of the day. We talked about setting expectations, but also you can think about something specifically to look for in a statistician when you're trying to find someone. And I think you all are onto this already, because you talked a lot about, there's a lot of things about communication in that word cloud, and that is exactly what you should be looking for in a statistician. You need your statistician to be able to communicate the statistics that they've done in a way that you can understand and put into a manuscript that other people can understand. So if the goal is really to publish your research, you need the statistician who can really effectively communicate what they did in a publication in a way that everyone can understand. It's also helpful for you if you're going to be presenting your research to be able to take what they've done and actually be able to then communicate it to people at like a poster session or a presentation, for example. So you'll want both the excellent written and oral communication so that you can have manuscripts that are really strong and easy to understand, as well as someone that you can have a conversation with and really understand, and they can help you understand what they did in their analysis. You want someone who's patient and willing to explain statistical concepts, sometimes more than once. There's a lot of times where I try to explain a statistical concept. My collaborator is like, I still have no idea what you're talking about, and I have to go back to the drawing board and try again. And so I think that patience of trying to find a way to communicate in a way that everyone can understand is really important. Yeah, part of the role of a statistician is to be a teacher. And by that, our job is not to teach you how to do statistics. Our job is to teach you how to understand what the statistics did for your data, for your project in answering the research question. So whereas I don't think you should expect your statistician to teach you how to do what they did, they should be able to teach you exactly how to interpret what they did. You want someone that asks a lot of questions. Our director, Nicole Carlson, always says that statisticians come off as annoying because we ask so many questions. And if any of you have ever been in a scope of work meeting with me, it's basically an hour meeting where I just ask you questions the whole time. And we don't do this to be annoying. We do this because we really, really want to understand every single facet of your project so that we can successfully conduct an analysis that makes sense and answers your research question. So if someone is asking you a million questions, it's not because they're trying to challenge you or question you, it's because they really just are honestly trying to figure out they're trying to get the full picture of your project, and that's a really good thing if they're asking you a lot of questions. And then some of these are kind of, you want someone who meets deadlines and is responsive, and communication gets back to our word cloud that we made earlier. You want them to have relevant research experience. Sometimes you have a very specific niche data set and you need someone who's worked with that type of data before in order to get the analysis done. You also want someone who respects research ethics. And what I mean by that is sometimes your statistician might push back if you've kind of strayed from your main analysis questions. And we don't necessarily do that because we are lazy and we don't want to do extra work. We're doing it because we are trying to respect the ethics of not p-hacking, essentially. And also, it's really important, especially if you have a clinical trial that is registered on clinicaltrials.gov, that you are answering the questions you said you were going to answer. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult to publish, essentially, if you haven't actually answered those questions that you put forth in clinicaltrials.gov. So if you get pushback from your statistician, generally what they're trying to do is actually help you to respect research ethics and not kind of going down a rabbit hole of something else and really sticking to the a priori research questions. All right. So the next question is one we get asked a lot, is where you can find a statistician. The best place to start is your department. And so I was like going to go back to these. Yeah, so the best place to start is see if your department has an agreement with a statistician or a group on campus. So CETA has a bunch of different agreements across different departments and divisions. An example is for gastroenterology, I am that person. And so if you are in GI, you would hopefully go to your division head and say, hey, do we have a resource? And they would say, yes, we do. And you would go and work with that person. And the reason why this is so helpful is because your department has already funded, your department is funding that person's time to help your group do analysis. And we have found that this is definitely the most successful way of doing research, especially for collaborators who are, or investigators, who are more junior. Maybe you've just started as an attending, for example, who don't have a bunch of research money. already from grants or things like that, this is the best way to get support for your research, is if your department has some sort of agreement in place to provide statistical support for their faculty members. And I do know that our director is currently on a tour, basically, of all the departments in the School of Medicine. So she's working to meet with all of the different departments. But if this is something you think your department could really benefit from, I do encourage you to reach out to your department or division head, as well as you are welcome to reach out to us and see if we already have an existing agreement or are in communication with your department to create one. If that is not available to you, your next best bet is to see whether you have a collaborator or a mentor who has some sort of an agreement with a statistician. And so see if that person can also help you, has either the funding or essentially the time to help you with that. There are 4 main hubs on campus for biostatistics help. We know there's a bunch of different ones that are like that are maybe center specific or department specific, but these are the 4 large resources that are like essentially across multiple departments. So the first one's ACORDS, which is Health Services and Outcomes Research. Then CETA, which is our group, is meant to be kind of the generalists on campus. So we have all types of biostat support. We do, we have both biostatistics and bioinformatics. We do omics research. So we are kind of the catch-all if one of these other groups doesn't specifically fit your research. The Children's Hospital has a group that is specifically for people who are doing pediatrics or child health research. So if you have a Children's Colorado email address, that is the place where you should go first. And generally, if you come into the intake, I will say, I noticed your email. Have you talked to them? So that is a good resource, at least to start, is because they have pricing that is specifically for your group. So you get a discount on hourly services that is specific for peds and child health research. And then similarly, the Cancer Center, biostatistics and bioinformatics shared resource, that is both, as you might guess from the name, biostats and bioinformatics, but again, for people who are doing cancer research. So if you're doing cancer research, you get a special discounted rate on their biostats and bioinformatics services. So a good tip, a couple of tips when you're trying to find a statistician is that sometimes you need a statistician who has very specific expertise in the methods being proposed. And so that is a good time to go to one of these centers and say, you know, this is exactly what I'm working on. These are the type of data I have. Do you have someone who has expertise in that type of data? All of us, most academic statisticians have a very broad knowledge. We've generally all taken like a pretty broad variety of classes on different methodologies. But most of us also have something that we are really specifically an expert in. So whereas like a lot of us can do pretty much not any, that's maybe too broad, but most of us can do a wide variety of projects and a wide variety of methods, but then also have some very specific expertise that might be actually necessary for your project. So it's worth asking and really being clear about the type of data you have, because that might actually steer you in the direction of someone very specific on campus to help you out. And just a reminder that we don't know everything about anything that is related to numbers. We do love numbers, but we don't know all of the answers and all the methods all the time. The other thing we want to remind you is that we don't work for free. So these are services that you should be prepared to pay for. That's why if your department can support it, that's really the best case scenario. And we found that's by far the most helpful way, especially for people who don't have large research portfolios and labs. But you should be prepared to pay for our services. And another reason why, if you have a specific type of research that falls under one of these groups' purviews, it's helpful to go there and get a discount on those services. Any questions about finding a statistician on our campus? I acknowledge that it's not clear always where to go and who to go to. And actually, for that reason, these four groups have all been working behind the scenes to try to establish a joint navigation system. So this is kind of a sneak preview of something we're going to roll out on the campus this year, which is the CU Biostatistics and Bioinformatics Ecosystem Cube Navigation. And so basically, we know that it's hard to figure out when you should go to one group versus the other. And so we are creating one place where you can put in the information about your project and what you need. And we actually will figure out behind the scenes where you should go. And the hope is that, for example, if you came into the Cube navigation queue and we said, well, this person looks like they might work in pediatrics, we can send them to children's, but if children's doesn't have the expertise, it actually is going to be behind the scenes, like triage back maybe to CETA to see if we can actually, if we have someone who has a better expertise for that project, for example. So this has been an ongoing effort that should hopefully be launching, I'm hoping sooner rather than later. And so that we can really take the guessing game out, so that you all don't have to guess where you should go. You can kind of just put your name in here and we can help find you. And we're also working to connect with the smaller groups that are integrated into different departments and divisions so that we can hopefully help triage out as well to those groups. So stay tuned. All right. We have one more section, which comes with two polls, so I'm going to launch them. So the first one is, have you ever worked with, or do you plan to work with EHR data? And do you know what a relational database is? All right, so it looks like about 60% of people have worked with or plan to work with EHR data, and about 78, so almost 88% of people don't know what a relational database is. So the reason why I ask these questions is because if you have ever pulled EHR data or gotten data from Compass, you have received a relational database. And the reason why that's so important is because relational databases have characteristics that make the data wrangling much harder. And I think what I see a lot of the time is that people receive data, they ask for data from Compass, they receive it, and then they are like, I don't understand what to do with these tables, I just want one rectangular data set. And so I'm gonna this is like a very simple example of a relational database. And so maybe what you expected was something like this bottom table here that has an ID, a name, this is a dog, so breed, color, and age. But what you actually got was three different tables. And what a relational database means is that all of these tables do connect together through unique identifiers, but you need probably some coding skills, not probably, you need coding skills in order to actually merge these together. So this is the reason why I say this is such a simple example is because theoretically you could match this top left table here based on name, and you would add a column for dry and wet food and whether they're a good boy. And then using the tag number, you could add the characteristics from this top right table, and you would add height and weight. And then again, like I said, you would end up with one nice rectangle, which is what we expect when we get a data set. Excuse me. What makes especially EHR data more complicated is that a lot of times some of these tables have multiple observations per ID. Sometimes they have multiple observations for several IDs, and some are missing from one table, but are in another table, for example. And so let's think about if in this height and weight table here, you had maybe 5 or 6 different weights for each one of these tag numbers. If you wanted to merge that back in with this table below, you would have to think about how to do so. Are you going to take the mean height and weight per dog and add it back in? Are you going to take, maybe there's a date column? Are you going to take the most recent height and weight and put that back into yours? And so there becomes, once you have multiple observations, but you're trying to get to this rectangle data set, there becomes some data wrangling and that has to happen in each individual table before it's merged into one large data set. So now you all know what a relational database is. And so when you are asking for data from Compass, and even if you're downloading data directly from Trinetics, it's going to come to you in this form of a relational database. So you're going to get several tables. They're all going to connect somehow, but you need to have coding and you need to have some sort of data management background in order to actually connect those in a way that's going to get you to that analysis data set that you can use to do something like a regression on. And then another reason I bring this up is because not a lot of times, currently from Compass, you can get data for free. You can get data from Trinetics that's de-identified for free. But so people get all this free data. They'll get millions and millions of rows, and they come to us and we quote them $20,000 to $30,000 worth of data management. So I think something that we are trying to figure out a better way to communicate is that even if these data are freely available, managing them into one analysis data set is very time consuming and often requires a significant amount of FTE or just a significant amount of time in order to wrangle them with that data management expertise. One of the things you can do to try to get that cost down is to have a more narrow focus when you are pulling data from an EHR. So one way you could do this is you can come to the 1-hour consults and say, this is my research question, and they can try to help you walk through the different tables that Compass would give you and help you figure out what to ask for in each one of those tables. So a good example of this is sometimes people are like, I want to pull all medications. If you pull all medications for all of the people in your cohort, that is going to be millions and millions of rows likely. And so maybe a more effective way of doing this that's going to save you time and money is to say, I want this specific set of medications, and then Compass will give you just the medication, that set of medications, for example. Or I'm only interested in these 4 diagnoses. They can just give you any results for the patients in your cohort that have that ICD-9 or ICD-10 code. So narrowing your focus is absolutely going to help you decrease the cost. I think some people go into getting the data and they're like, we've worked so hard to get here and I just want everything that I could possibly get. But that can actually really shoot you in the foot if you are trying to do things quickly and in a manageable budget, because if you just have everything, that means you have to pay a data manager to go through and really figure out exactly which rows are relevant to pull into an analysis data set and summarize. So any questions about working with EHR data and kind of some of these, some of these caveats to pulling large relational databases? Like, it's a quiet crew here, so I'm glad that I at least did polls, so I know you're all still here. So this is my end of our shameless plug for CETA, who is sponsoring Data Week, so I feel like it's fair. But if you go to our website and click on Connect with Us, and then also we have these tiles at the top of our website. This is the best way currently to get a hold of someone in CETA. whether you want to attend a 1 hour consult to get some feedback on your project. So we limit these to 2 every 60 days with the idea that you would come in, ask a question, get feedback, and then maybe come back a few weeks later to kind of follow up and make sure that everything's going the way you wanted it to. If you are working on a grant, it's really important to have some quantitative expertise on a grant submission. We do require that you come with at least 60 days before your internal deadline, and that you include statistical support in your grant budget. But other than that, actually, we will help you develop your grant for free within those parameters. If you have a project where you need hourly consulting, we do offer that. So whether that's doing kind of one manuscript worth of analysis or doing a power calculation, maybe some study design consulting that's more in depth than what you can get from the 1 hour consults, we can do that. And if you or your division or your department are interested in actually building, or your research lab are interested in building a long-term partnership with a statistician, we also are happy to do that. Although I will say that once the cube navigation launches, this is all going to kind of be funneled into there. So we're hoping that kind of streamlines things with, if you need statistical support in any of these domains, you should be able to fill out that form, say that you want to work with CETA, and it will come to us. So we have reached the end. Somehow I really took the whole hour. So there's a lot of me talking, so I would love it if you have any questions. And look at those, like, before you leave, there will be a survey in the chat, and yeah, there you go. Samantha just put a survey in the chat. If you fill it out, you'll be entered into the raffle. So yeah, so please, any questions that you have, either now or if you want to reach out by email, my email is there. Any question about finding a statistician, working with a statistician?
Hi there, Camille. Just quick question. Well, thanks for presenting, first of all, but what is the website for the statisticians at Children's? How do we get connected to them?
I'm gonna stop sharing. I was like, I think it's linked, but so in the slides, I think it is linked, but I can get you the website to reach out to them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you for such a great talk. I had a question. You mentioned how sometimes you want to pick a person who is more nuanced to the data you're working with, maybe is more familiar. And I guess I'm wondering, how that looks like. Are there statisticians who work with specific types of data? Are there specializations? Or maybe if you could speak a little more to that, please.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna put this link in the chat before I forget to, so some examples of that. If you work with omics data, that is a very specific type of data that not everyone has expertise in. So I am not an omics person. I don't do genomics or that's just not my expertise. So someone came to me with like an omics data set, I wouldn't actually be able to do it. I'd have to pass it on to one of my colleagues. But we do have a whole group in CETA that specializes specifically in those types of data, and they know exactly how to analyze them, for example. Another good example of this, I mean, EHR data is another one, so that's something where I do have expertise, and so I'm able to help people parse through what they've gotten in their EHR data and put it together in a way that can answer the research question they want to answer. The other one is like streaming, like high, what am I trying to say? Anyone who's doing research with like wearables, for example, where you're getting like an observation like 5 times a second, for example, so you have like millions and millions of observations per person. That's a very specific type of data that requires a specific type of processing and analysis in order to look at it. So those are a couple examples of when you'd want like specific expertise. But if you have just like, I was like, there's nothing wrong with having like survey data. Most statisticians can handle survey data. If you've collected things in a red cap, generally that database would be something that any biostatistician could handle. I'm trying to think of other examples. Is that helpful though? Does that answer your question? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so some types of data have very specific types of analysis that go along with them. And so it's best to just kind of be as detailed as possible when you're asking for help so that we know exactly who to match you with. That's a
Thank you,
good
very
question.
helpful.
What other questions do people have? And like I said, these slides will be available if you want to click any of the links that were in the slides.
And I'm putting in the chat, you should have already gotten access, but this is just the OneDrive that has all of the information, like all of the folders for all the sessions with all of the material.
What other questions? Oh, how to prepare. I actually feel like I was like, at one point I had slides about this, but I wonder if I took them out. I think I did take them out. How to prepare for meeting with a statistician. That's a great question. Really thinking, yeah, so if you have a protocol that you can bring, that's helpful. But really just writing down, trying to, they can help you kind of get to a clear research question, but I guess I'm gonna start my answer over by saying, like, maybe it's more helpful to tell you what we're gonna ask you. So we're gonna ask you things like, who is the patient population? I work with patients, so I apologize if you're not, I apologize if you're not, like, if you don't work specifically with like patients, but we're gonna ask you like, who is the patient population of interest? How many samples do you think you have? How many people do you think you have? What are the outcomes and how are they measured? What are the predictors of interest and how are they measured? Where are you getting your data from? Is it already collected? Is it survey data? Is it EHR data? Yeah, we're gonna try to get to every facet basically of your research question. Does that help? Okay, awesome. I was like, somewhere I had a whole list of questions. I wonder if I can find it. Yeah, I guess other things we might ask you. If you have more than one observation per person, so do you have like repeated measurements on a patient? We'll want to know that. We will want to know if there's any biases that might be present in your data. So for example, do sicker patients get one medication and patients who are not quite as sick get a different medication? Because that could really affect your analysis. And then we'll ask you about missing data. So how complete are your data? Those are some other questions we'll ask. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for joining. I'll stay on for like another couple of minutes in case people think of other questions that they need, but thank you all so much. And I hope this was helpful. And let us know in the survey.
If you need me to put it up again, let me know. But it's the first, let me get the end. Thank you so much, Camille. This was an amazing talk. It was awesome. I even learned some new things.
I'm glad. Thanks for inviting me.
Say Joy has one more question.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Does IRB matter for advice?
What do you mean? Like if you have an IRB, does that? I was like, I need a little more detail.
Like, do you, Joy, are you asking, like, does the statistician need to be IRB approved for the project before they give advice? Or IRB approved?
Okay. Yeah, so if you are, if you wanna go do a 1 hour consult, you don't need IRB approval generally to talk to a statistician. You need IRB approval if you are doing any sort of analysis. So it's your responsibility as an investigator to have the proper IRB approval, excuse me, in place before anyone touches your data and does the analysis. Even if it's going to be exempt, it's important to have that in place before someone actually performs analysis.
And even if you are giving advice, like you can't give, like, you can't show them the data that would potentially have like PHI and stuff like that. You can sort of ask like general questions, but when it comes to IRB, like you can't show other people the data
Yeah, that's a good point.
until they're on your project, until they're on your IRB.
You're welcome. Thanks, you too.
Sorry, I stepped in there.